Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn. Okay, everybody, it's a couple minutes after 7. So tonight I'm kind of sitting in for Marilyn, even though she's right there with us. So it's like she's grading me. I just wanted to say a couple of things for the, for the friends of the library. If you are looking for the calendar, please go to stirlingfriends.org and download it. The libraries are trying to be more efficient and they're only printing a few hard copies of the calendars. And it's right there on the internet, so it's really easy to see. And you can also enlarge it a whole bunch so that you could see. Most everything that we talk about is regular, it's regularly programmed, like Cinema Paradiso will be on the 11th. And we already know the movie on that. That's Ex-Husbands. The big thing, 2 things I want to remind you guys of. On the 16th, we're going to have an in-person book fair from 1 to 4. Don't forget, that's how we make a lot of money to present these programs. And also, if you have by any chance read The Women, our Broward County Director, Allison Grubbs, will actually be at our library, and that's going to be on March 20th from 3 to 4. And she'll be discussing and talking with us all about the book. So we always like to try to have a big show so that we look like we really support the library really well. So the only other thing is that Shelly will discuss. Shelly will be back on the 6th and the 27th. And he will discuss the movies that we will see. And Shelly, let's take it away and let's go to Japan.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Good evening, everybody. This is a much smaller, intimate group we have tonight, but that's terrific. Okay. Tokyo Story from Japan from 1953. The director's name is Yosujiro Ozu. Yosujiro Ozu was a towering figure in Japanese cinema, known for his distinct and minimalist style, as you've seen. Unlike his contemporaries who embraced dramatic narratives, he focused on the subtle dramas of everyday life, particularly within the Japanese family. He began his career in the silent era. He directed comedies and crime films before establishing his signature style in the 1930s. He lived his entire life in Japan, and his work is deeply rooted in Japanese culture and aesthetics. Tokyo Story, made in 1953, was a period of significant transition for Japan as it recovered from World War II and navigated Western influences. The film subtly reflects these societal shifts, contrasting.
All right, you know what? Bring me my phone. I'll do what I did this afternoon.
Don't forget, everybody, to mute yourselves unless you're actively talking with Shelly, please.
Yeah, you could do it, Jackie. Okay, I'm sorry. The film subtly reflects these societal shifts, contrasting traditional values with modernizing urban life. Ozu consistently explored themes of family dynamics and generational differences and the impermanence of life, often depicting the quiet disruptions and emotional undercurrents within seemingly ordinary families as they face aging, marriage, and changing social norms. His personal life was interesting. He himself never married, and he lived with his mother until her death, dying himself a year later at the age of 60. Some critics have drawn parallels between his personal life and the themes of familial bonds and loneliness in his films. It was so interesting because all his films went deeply into marriage and family, fathers and daughters, and mothers and daughters and sons, and yet he was never married. A simple story, simply told, Tokyo Story is considered Ozu's masterpiece. It continues to be one of the most widely admired of his films and one of the most immediately accessible. The theme of disintegration of a family as a microcosm of societal changes is one which is universal. Was the theme of such films, if you remember them, of John Ford's How Green Was My Valley, or Orson Welles' great film, The Magnificent Ambersons, But Ozu is able to tell his story without the usual melodramatic flourishes. The story unfolds in an almost lifelike fashion, and we in the audience feel, or should feel, as if we're eavesdropping on this family. Gradually, small details and little incidences build to create an overwhelming empathy. Hardly anything actually happens in this film, and yet it is considered one of the most emotionally involving dramas ever made by critics, other filmmakers, and generations of audiences as well. And interestingly enough, it was inspired by a Hollywood film from 1937 entitled Make Way for Tomorrow. It was loosely adapted to the Japanese context and the director's style. Ozu's screening partner had seen Make Way for Tomorrow in Japan in 1937, and after the war suggested it to the director, who liked the story. Both films depict an elderly couple, their problems with family and traveling to visit their children. Differences are that the older film takes place in Depression-era US, with the couple's problems being economical. And Tokyo Story takes place in post-war Japan, where the problems are cultural and emotional, with the most marked difference being that they both end differently. They both end differently. By the way, Make Way for Tomorrow is available. I'm sure it's available online. You could look it up, and it is worth the trip. It is worth the trip. Themes in Tokyo Story include the breakup, as I said, westernization of the traditional Japanese family after the war, and the inevitability of children growing apart from their parents. It contrasts the urban life of the children in Tokyo with the rural life of their parents. Taking place at that time, it is a few years after the new civil code of 1948 in Japan stimulated the country's rapid regrowth and embraced Western capitalist ideals, while simultaneously abandoning older traditions specific to the Japanese family and its values. Within the arc of the film's action, the director cunningly conceals a strong structure after leaving their youngest child, Kyoko, behind. Tsukichi and Tomi Hariyama are shown visiting their children in descending birth order. First, they stay with Coach Koichi and his family, then with Shiga and hers, then with Noriko, who married their third-born child and who either died or went missing in the war, and finally with young Keizo in Osaka, off-screen. We never see them visiting him. They have visited Keizo first en route to Tokyo. We didn't see that either. But Ozu and his scenarist Yoshikata Yoda, portray only their stopover during the return trip, partly to allow us to form expectations about how hospitable their youngest son would be, but also to respect the family tree structure. Now, I don't know if you were aware of that, but they did it from oldest to youngest. Ozu also brilliantly and almost incidentally captures the stark divisions between the pre-war and post-war world versus new ideas, clothing, values, lifestyle, expectations. It isn't merely a story about progress, but about how we pay for it in our personal lives. How we pay for it in our personal lives. Thinking back on the film, you might have picked up on some of the director's stylistic techniques, which he employed in most of his films to heighten the emotional impact. And I'll just review them for you. His use of ellipsis, what is known as ellipsis, or having key scenes take place off camera. We may hear about them before they happen, and then we hear about them after, with the viewer only learning about them through the character's dialogue. For example, the train journeys to and from Tokyo are really not depicted. The audience never sees Shukichi and Tomi visit their son, Keizo, as I said, and Tomi's illness begins off screen. We don't see the beginning of it. The tatami shot, now this is very famous. It's the low camera position that we are looking at the film through at the eye level of someone sitting on a tatami mat, the traditional Japanese floor mat. This perspective creates a sense of intimacy and draws us into the domestic space of the characters. It's as if we're sitting in that room with them. It is also flattens the perspective of what we're seeing, emphasizing a two-dimensional nature of the screen and creating a unique visual aesthetic when you think about it. Now, you're not thinking about it as you watch it, but you realize that you're just looking, it's static. He uses what are known as pillow shots in all of his films. And they are brief, often static shots of landscapes, empty rooms, trees, clothing on the line, inserted between scenes. These shots are not directly related to the narrative. As you see, they don't have anything to do with the story, but they serve several purposes. The pacing and the rhythm. They create a contemplative rhythm and slow the pacing, allowing us to absorb the emotional weight of the preceding scene. Give us a chance to think about what just happened. They act as visual transitions, shifting the mood or location very subtly. They also evoke a sense of Japanese aesthetics. We appreciate the beauty of simple, transient moments. There is thematic resonance. The pillow shots can also thematically reinforce the film's concerns, such as the passage of time, the beauty of nature contrasted with urban life, and the sense of emptiness or loneliness, also distance, as when we're in the city, he may shoot a building and we're just looking at the windows, the floors of the building, and then all of a sudden we're in the building. He uses a minimalist scene structure or set structure. His sets are meticulously composed if you look at them, yet they're understated. He favored simple, uncluttered spaces. You see very angular, very pure, clean spaces, highlighting the characters and their interactions rather than elaborate backgrounds. This minimalism focuses attention on the drama itself and the emotional nuances of the characters. He also uses direct address to the camera. Now, in Hollywood filmmaking, there's what we call the 180 degree. In a conversation, you'll see one character talking, and then the camera cuts, and we see other character talking. Well, in some of his scenes, you would notice that he entirely avoids a direct camera address or breaking that fourth wall, talking to the camera. This reinforces the sense of observing real life unfold. These two people are talking to each other, maintaining a respectful distance from the character's intimate world. He uses long takes and static camera. He favored these long takes and minimal camera movements, and the static camera encourages us to carefully observe the subtle shifts in emotion and relationships within each scene. When the camera does move, it is often a very slow, deliberate pan, or a tilt, as we call it, further emphasizing the film's measured rhythm. He contributes his palettes. Here is black and white. He did move into color in his last few films, also to evoke the tranquility and understated beauty that he found in Japan. To summarize the film, I see it, and I'm merely talking from my point of view here, I see it as a journey of distance, both physically and metaphorically. The narrative is deceptively simple, focusing on, Shukichi and Tomi's interactions with their children and the subtle emotional distances that emerge between them. Both of their eldest children, the doctor, Koichi, and Shiga, the hairdresser, are preoccupied with their own lives and families. And while they're not necessarily unkind, they are often too busy to give their parents the attention and care that they crave. They made this journey. As we saw it, it may be the last that they'll make, and they wanted to see these kids, and these kids just have their own lives and don't have time for them. Ironically, the couple finds the most genuine warmth and hospitality from Noriko, their widowed daughter-in-law. And despite her own grief and modest circumstances, she's the one that goes out of her way to make them comfortable and show them the city. She gives them the tour of the city. And I'll talk more about this in a bit. The parents experience a sense of disappointment and loneliness in Tokyo. They realize their children have grown distant and are living very different lives than they could have imagined. And finally, with Tomi's illness and eventual passing, while sad, it is presented with Ozu's characteristic restraint and acceptance. The film concludes with Tsukichi left alone, reflecting on loss and the changing nature of the family. Ultimately, the film poignantly portrays the generational gap and the changing values that were being experienced at that period. The children, focused on their careers in modern urban life, struggle to understand or prioritize those traditional values and emotional needs of their aging parents. And we also see the difference in the clothing they're wearing. There is this, insistence on Tomi's part, yet Shukichi wears suits. He, in certain scenes, yes, he's wearing a kimono, but most of the time he's wearing westernized clothing. Among the key scenes that exemplify many of the techniques that I discussed and the thematic concerns, there's the opening establishing shots. When you think back to the opening of the film, there we see pillow shots. We see him focusing on nature, a train going by, the harbor. We hear the sounds of the boats, the kids going to school, their youngest daughter, Kyoko, the teacher, and finally we see Tsukichi and Tomi rooted in a peaceful traditional life. She's talking to a neighbor who walks by, and they have a close bond with each other. We also see how the slow pacing and serene visuals deeply contrast with the bustling energy of the city they will encounter. In their first visit with their oldest son, Koichi, they are overwhelmed by the noise and energy of the grandkids, visually and orally. Ozu emphasizes the clash of generations and the older couple's displacement in their children's modern lives. We see the young kid is learning English. We see this adaptation of Western culture in their own approach, in the kids, in the grandkids. And we see this occurring again and again when they visit with Shiga, where the theme of her economic situation also plays a very important part of her behavior. When she needs the room they're in to have her meeting, all of these things that happen. Another key passage occurs when Shiga and Koichi are when Tsukichi and Tomi are shuttled off by Koichi and Shiga off to the Atami Resort. Intended as a relaxing getaway arranged by their children, it turns out to be a noisy and unpleasant experience. The scene underscores the children's lack of understanding of their parents' needs and desires. They wanted to be with them. They didn't want to go off to a resort. The contrast between the supposed relaxation and their discomfort is subtly conveyed through Ozu's visual storytelling. Here, too, we see an emotional conversation between Tsukichi and Tomi as they walk along the shore. And the use of pillow shots when they retire at night, it almost grabs your heart when he focuses on their shoes outside the room. I mean, that shot has always stood out for me from the first time I've seen that film. You know, I expect it now, but it's a shot filled with a lot of feeling when you think about it. And one of the most moving scenes was Noriko, the daughter-in-law's conversation with Tomi while discussing their son and her lost husband. We see their shared loneliness, highlighting their unexpected connection as each offers the other the most genuine empathy and understanding. And there's restraint in their emotional performances in that quiet moment of intimacy that we watch. It is touching. I mean, his picture's over there. They're sitting and they're just, you know, and you know, one wanting to tell the other, get on with your life, which again recurs with Tsukichi. And in the end, following Tomi's passing, after everyone else is gone, the scene between Tsukichi and Noriko is particularly poignant. Again, she demonstrates more empathy, kindness, and understanding than any of their own children, as they share a quiet moment of reflection, discussing loss and the future. As he gives her Tomi's watch, her departure, and seeing Tsukichi standing in solitude outside his home, emphasize the film's bittersweet acceptance of life's impermanence. And you can see how the use of space, distance, and the understated dialogue serve to convey their emotions. And in contrast, Noriko's departure on the train, her looking at the watch, convey the feeling of moving on, as well as how important memory is in life. Ozu has so cleverly, almost incidentally, as I said, captured the contrasting divisions between pre- and post-war Japan, the old versus the new ideas. And it isn't just that story about progress, but about how we pay for it, as I said. Ozu was very restrained with his editing. He avoided the visual cues, and this is one of the things that might have affected you in watching the film. He avoids the visual cues and shorthand techniques used by Western directors to lead us by the nose into a scene, to give us more information. Here, it's as if the characters are living their lives unaware that a movie is being shot. And we get to know them gradually and look for personal characteristics along the way and begin to understand the implications of little gestures, quiet remarks, and certain actions. When Shukichi gets drunk and comes back home to Shiga, she says to him, you're starting all over again, indicating that he may have been drinking too much when they were living home. Tokyo Story is often admired as a work that achieves great emotional effect while avoiding melodrama. In lacking sentimental triggers and contrived emotions, the film doesn't so much as force our emotions as much as it wants us to share its understanding, And that, my friends, is my brief explanation of the film and a little rundown of who Ozu was and what was so important. And if you like, there are so many other of his films. He didn't make that many films, but his post-war films were probably the best in my estimation, although some of his early ones are also interesting, but not as accessible. His later ones are all accessible, and they're wonderful to look at. They're wonderful to experience. And they have some of the same actors. He worked with an ensemble. In fact, the character who plays Shukichi was in a number of his films, and he was only 35 when he played the father in this film. And so he was pretty young, and he ages through all his films, and you see it, and it's apparent. He's wonderful. So now I'd like to open it up to the group and hear what you had to say, what scenes you liked. If you didn't like the film, to tell me why. so we could discuss that, but also your feelings about the film. So who wants to jump in first? Sandra Lefkowitz, go right in there.
I really want to thank you because you're adding to my personal and maybe to others vocabulary of which to approach a film. And by doing that, I'm able to introduce myself to cultural similarities and dissimilarities that I would never have thought about. And I think that what I am valuing so much, and I really would love to hear from other people as well, but I am valuing, as I said, the vocabulary that you're giving us to approach films that I would approach quite differently, based on my own, not my intellectual knowledge, but my personal emotional responses. And so I really had to get that said. It's making a marked difference in the way I look at foreign film.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And that's essentially, that's what it did for me when I was younger. It introduced me to the vocabulary, which I explored deeply throughout the rest of my life. I appreciate you telling me this, but it's something it's very difficult to impart on younger people. It is just to come to and learn a new language, a filmic language that really can open up their experience. But I really appreciate that, and I thank you. And it's interesting that comparing this to the last film we saw, now I'm sure some of you saw similarities in the way Coriata directed his film, Still Walking, and this film, and also in the story of family. And that's why I paired these two films. That's another little trick of mine is I understand how to do that. I mean, I try to anyway, is to show you films in contrast and show you a culture that, was in transition here, and even there is still in transition in many ways, but still tries to retain some of what they had. So thank you, Sandra. Yep, continue. Go ahead. Yep, you got to unmute.
I thought the first reaction was that it was slow. And I put things in historical perspective. This was an era of Doris Day and Rock Hudson. And all of a sudden, there was the separation, and I got caught. It was really beautiful. And at first, you see the cultural differences, but the human similarities. And I thought it was an incredible film.
Thank you. That's terrific. Thank you. I'm so glad you appreciate it. Yes. And I don't, when somebody says to me, the film is really slow, it's paced. It's pacing. It's about pacing. And if you let yourself go with the film, you begin to fall into it and appreciate what's happening, is to deal with it that way. If you look at American Westerns, especially some of the more modern ones, they're very slow if there's no action. And it's the same thing. You're watching life unfold in a different era. And here too we are. So it is a technique which I find in many, many different cultures, that their films are much, I guess, slower paced. Karen.
Well, I wouldn't just say that I like this film better than Still Walking. I guess I just like the characters in general. One thing that stood out with me was how that the women were treated. Like the children, the doctor's wife, they were unruly and disrespectful, and I'm thinking, then the grown-up children were actually disrespectful to their parents. But I'm thinking that maybe the father was maybe not he seems like a nice little man right now, but I think in the past he may have been drinking a lot out with his friends and all that. And maybe he would have, maybe this is learned behavior from him. So that was something that struck me.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's there's a reason that this film is has lasted as the test of time. It's, as I said, filmmakers, critics, they voted it one of the 10 best films of all time. And back in 2022, it was again number 3 on the list after The Godfather. It has shown up on 10 best lists since the 60s. And this film didn't come out in America until
Right.
the early 60s.
Mhm.
I didn't see it till the 70s. So it's indicative of the fact that we got to see these late. It was interesting because Ozu was not looked upon as an exportable director. Okay, Akira Kurosawa, his films immediately went overseas. Now, remember, this film was adapted from an American film, yet they thought the distributors in Japan, the production houses in Japan, thought he was too Japanese, that it wouldn't break the barrier. People just wouldn't understand or want to understand.
Right.
And so it's very interesting to learn those things as well. Thank you, Karen. Marilyn.
Well, I also found it quite slow, and it was a long film, and I did find the pace slow. However, I mean, I was happy that I saw it. I don't really understand why it was that well, that highly ranked, but I'm not a theater buff like you are, so that's my personal opinion. But the thing that I'm commenting on is the lack of what I see, and maybe it's a cultural thing that I'm not getting. There just seemed to be a really lack of warmth between the generations. It not only the parents to their children, the children to the parents, the grandchildren to the grandparents was, to me, also was such a lack of warmth. And is this something that in both films, it wasn't just Tokyo Story, it was in Still Walking also. I found that the parents really wanted to be with the children. The children really looked for any reason not to be with the parent, and the grandchildren could even care less. So am I missing something? Is this a cultural thing? And if you see other Japanese films, will you see more warmth, or it just doesn't exist? I don't know.
Well, did you see Still Walking? You saw Still Walking. You
Yeah,
see the
but I
same
did-
thing in that film.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yes, it's their outward behavior is very restrained, very restrained. There's no physical touching. Their intimacy is left behind the door. You don't penetrate the Japanese psyche that easily. They don't show outward emotion. There was always a term Westerners used, inscrutable. They were inscrutable. You can't see past a certain veneer of their character. They don't want to let their true emotions come out. They try to hide them. Whereas seeing the kids running around that's as much emotion as you get, because first of all, they're kids, but they're growing up in a new world within the context of the film. And you see it also in the children in Still Walking, both the young children who get friendlier in the film, and also the children in Still Walking. They argue with them. You see the son in Still Walking, questioning, why don't they understand? They're getting things wrong and all of this, and talking to one another. And they could be very cutting, as the mother was in Still Walking. We saw different characters. They were much more biting, much more sarcastic in that film. Whereas here, the parents are not sarcastic at all. It is a change in generation. There's no question about it. These are cultural shifts, and they're due to Western society. A lot of it is due to Westernization. You got to remember, they go to the movies too, and they see Western films, and the kids see Western films, and they see differences in behavior. We always have to think of the song "Kids" from Bye Bye Birdie. Each generation questions what the successive one, the behavior. They're not the way we were, perfect in every way. So we look at it that way, and we have to think about that when we watch these kinds of films. But I understand your feeling. And one of the reasons, let me just get into the reason why filmmakers, especially, and critics admire the film. First of all, it doesn't follow the usual formats of film. Okay, it doesn't try to, it's not a Me Too film. It's very different, and they look for that. Directors look for style, and he had a distinct style. The fact that he never moved the camera, the fact that he did it at the Tommy height, all of these techniques create something different, something visually different. It's an art form, and they respect that. And they look at it, and they try in many ways to recreate that. And you don't want to recreate, you want to recast. You want to give it a refreshing twist. How do I refresh something? And he refreshed cinema in his own way. And I think that's what they were regarding, a lot of what they regarded when they considered the film's greatness. Also, it's the way the emotions do come out. It's very, very subtle. Very subtle. So I think we have to look at that. But I hope, you'll appreciate this the more you see, Jackie, I'll get to everyone, I promise. Yeah.
I think
ahead.
Susan was first.
Oh, was Susan first? Okay, Susan, Pauls.
It doesn't matter. Hi there.
Okay, go ahead.
There were
Sorry, thank you.
a couple of things about the film that struck me. One was thinking about the history of it, that the pre-war life in Japan was so different than post-war life, with an emperor and obedience and status of society so entrenched. It's your 180-degree change. We're here in America, pre-war life and post-war life were definitely different, but it was 90 degrees, maybe, of a change in how people behaved, how they treated each other, what the social classes were. And the other thing that struck me about the film, its slowness and the quietness, and the parents being lonely in where they lived and coming to see their children and spend time with their children, and wound up being even more lonely and quiet, stuck up in a bedroom with not even their plants to take care of, or dinner to make, or a neighbor to say hello to. The same thing at the resort. The absolute emptiness of their life. And I thought that the pace of the film and the staginess of it, there were two scenes where the mother and the father are sitting one behind the other. They're packing in a row rather than looking at each other. And the isolation of each of them was so vivid in that scene, in those scenes.
That's terrific. No, that's you nailed it. You nail a lot of it. But it also has to, you can expand the whole idea of what you're saying to the extent that, yes, and that's why he adapted it from this 1937 film that dealt with, a family in the same situation, two parents that go to visit their kids. But I will tell you, the difference in that one was because of the Depression, they had no place to live. And they had to go see these kids, and their children are grown, and they don't have room for them. They don't you know, they make a little room and then all of a sudden they don't want them there. You know, they're disturbing their lifestyle. And as they do that, we see them, you know, I'm not going to give away the ending. It's very different than this one, but it's one you should see. And you'd appreciate it. But my point is, it was economic. That film was economically driven. This one is driven by a number of situations. Yes, economics enters into it, but it's cultural shift from before the war to after the war. It's a westernization shift, a whole, you know, a whole new culture moving in on them. It's a behavioral shift in a sense that now money, you know, money does become important in their lives. But it's also the fact that this is the first time, and it's after the war, that families are becoming more distant by distance. Usually families stayed in one place. Now they're moving. And because now with Western civilization moving in, and also what happened in the United States after the war, more cars were being built, highways were being built, people could travel, people could leave the place they lived in. Same thing was happening in Japan to a certain extent. And this is why, you know, and their children moved into Tokyo because they could. Now they could expand. And Tokyo is being rebuilt because of this civil code. And we have to look at all of these things and think about all of these things, which have an impact on the family. So they are a microcosm of what's happening to the whole country. But that's terrific. Thank you, Susan. Jackie.
Something that Susan just said fits right into what I was going to say, is that I think everybody here is old enough to remember Harry Chapin and Cats in the Cradle. And I thought this movie fit right into that, where people, what you've done kind of comes back to you because we all get so involved in our lives. And that's exactly what happened. And it didn't surprise me in the least that the daughter-in-law was more involved with them, because she wasn't literally family and taking them for granted. She was somebody from the outside. But one of the things Susan said about the packing, which I absolutely love, was in the very beginning when she went, I don't have the mat. Yes, you do. I gave it to you. I don't have the mat. Yes, you do. I gave it to you. And that went back and forth. I absolutely love that, because quite honestly, look, Larry's not smiling, but he kind of is, because who hasn't gone through that? But one of the things that I was taken with was, we love an older era movie. And this movie actually was in a later era, and yet it harkened back to, like you're saying, about the movies in the 30s, with the black and white, the stillness, the quiet, the music. And I did like that. I agree with everybody. I don't know that I necessarily think it was slow, but I thought it was very long to get the point across. But I thought it was very typical of a family relationship, and the kids just not getting it, but the daughter-in-law really did. So I like that part of it. But like I said, I did enjoy some of the very subtle, what I considered interactions between them. And like the lady, the sister, or whoever it was, hanging in the window saying, you know, you're going to be lonely now. When in the very beginning, she said, you're going to go visit the kids and you won't be lonely. And it's like, yes, actually you will be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's true though. It's and it's a great reference using the song, the Harry Chapin song. But it's also the fact that we're watching, you know, most life in total is pretty banal. It's, you know, it's moments, and we're seeing moments of life. As I said, it's as if these people aren't aware of they're being in a movie. They're just, you know, that's how well the movie's being done, is we're just watching these people behave. This is about behavior. It's about a reflection of what's happening to the family in Japan. It's a time capsule in many ways of what we're looking at. And it's universal. You use the suitcase scene. It is so universal. So universal. Yes. I mean, I can't think of anybody that couldn't relate to that. It's so real, you know. It's the father misplaces something, and the mother says, "I gave it to you." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." And then it shows up, and I must have misplaced it. You know, there's always an excuse. There's always an excuse. But it is the behavior of the children that's striking and understandable. And understandable. You may not, you know, they're not unkind, they're not evil doers. They just are wrapped up in their own lives. And, you know, all of a sudden it's an intrusion. They see it as an intrusion. Now, I will tell you, there have been many, many variations of this film which have been made since. I think we did Cherry Blossoms. I think we did in this class. Cherry Blossoms is almost the direct descendant of this film. Remember the German couple who decides to go and visit the kids, and remember, and he winds up in Japan, which is the reason that, you know, the irony of he's going to Japan and he's bringing that film. The director felt, I'm bringing that film home. I'm bringing the story back to Japan. I'm bringing it back to where it belongs in her sense. So we've seen that. There's an Italian version. There's another American film, which was not a remake of the 1937 film, but it's a film with Robert De Niro. I believe it's called Everybody's Fine. It's where he goes and he visits his family. He decides to pick up, he's a widower, and he decides to pick up and visit his family. There's a version also with Jack Nicholson where he goes out to visit his son and decides to travel across country. There have been so many variations of this story, but this is the template. This is the template. Actually, I would say 1937 was the template, but this is the Japanese variation of the template. Interesting. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Barbara, I'm sorry, I forgot about you. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I liked the movie. I did find it slow. Not measured, but slow. And I just found it kind of contemporary. I mean, you know, I'm sure most of us are grandparents, and you just see that all the time. The grandparents come to visit, the kids can't be bothered. And so I found that relevant. And I had no idea, no clue, did not pick up in any way that this film was considered such a masterpiece until afterwards I Googled it. And I said, oh my God, look at that. And I saw things then. The low camera angle, I didn't even notice what that did to the movie. Or the fact that the camera never moved.
Yes.
And so then I had a whole new appreciation for it after you know, I saw that. And you know, I'm a person that looks at movies 100 best lists all the time. I swear to God, I had just never, it's escaped my radar.
Interesting. Yeah, the British Film Institute, they issue the what they call the Sight and Sound poll every 10 years on the first year of the decade, so 2011, 2021, and they poll directors, they poll the general public, they poll, you know, and they hand in their list of best films. And the usual characters wind up. I mean, The Godfather, Citizen Kane, Vertigo, and they're very stylistic films. They're very stylistic, very representative of their era, and also for production value and much more. And this film always winds up on that list, always in the top 10.
The Roger Ebert review of it is a thing of beauty.
Yes,
and he wrote it on the 100th, I think the 100th birthday of the director.
Uh-huh.
And it was
Yeah.
published again 10 years after Roger Ebert died. And then you just see different things.
Yeah, and
See
this is a
different
film
things.
that if you revisit it after a while, you will see more different things. You know, you become accustomed and you'll look at it from the point of view of, yeah, now I see what they're talking about, the tatami height. Now I see that.
Yeah.
I see the pillow shots. I
And you
see
see
why
and
they're
the
important.
teapot,
Yeah, the
and the
teapot, the
fans with the
radio.
fans.
Exactly. There are little details that you can pick
Mhm.
out that you remember. The fact is there's English signage in English that you see, products that stand out. You know, it shows you, he's clearly showing us the westernization that's taking place in the country. But it's these little nuance. I think the pillow shots are very important because they're they're transitional shots that we're not used to seeing all the time in film. And that's something directors picked up on and they use it.
Mhm.
You will see it in a lot of filmmakers' work. You know, the shots that have nothing to do with the plot, with the
Anything,
story.
yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's really it's interesting to, again, that's one of the reasons, one of the main reasons the film does
Hold
rate
up.
that high. Yeah, and why it holds up. Exactly. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Okay, well, that's terrific. Well, whoops, wait a minute. I got to do something here. Where are we? Let's see. Okay. So next month, which is next week.
Yeah.
We're into next week. I see you. This is the first time this has happened, I think, where I see you 2 weeks in a row. And next week we are in Italy. This next month is Italian film. And it is the story is entitled Kidnapped. It's the story of Edgardo Matera. It is a story that's true. It's heavily based on a true story, and it is another great director. His name is Marco Bellocchio, and I'll tell you more about him next week. But it is a story that took place in the 1850s, began in the 1850s in Italy. It took place first in Bologna, then it moves to Rome. It's a story of a 6-year-old boy that was literally kidnapped by the Catholic Church. He was ripped from his home because it was claimed that he had been baptized as a baby. And in those days, there was the edict that if you were baptized in a Jewish family, you could no longer stay with the family. And they took possession of him, and it's the family's fight to try and get him back, and it follows his story. It is a time during what was known as the Risorgimento, or the coming together of Italy. The church was not in favor at that time. There were wars within the country that were going on, and he covers everything. But again, this is a great work of cinematography, a great work of performance, of music. The production values are just superlative of the film. But it's a great example of I think, great Italian filmmaking from another master of international cinema. And I will be changing the film that will be coming on the 27th. And I'll be doing that very quickly because I didn't realize when I planned it in my foggy memory that we had done it before. The film was La Strada, and I'm sure a lot of you remember it and remember having done it. So I will change that film, but I will recommend you see it if you haven't seen it in a long time. And I'm always available to talk to you about it. But I will change the film, and I will let the library know probably as soon as tomorrow what the next film will be, what the film in the 27th will be. But I will look forward to seeing you next week for Kidnapped, which is available on Kanopy and other streaming services. So in the meantime, have a good week. because I'm gonna see you next week.
Thank
Be
you,
good.
Shelley.
Have a good
Good night,
weekend.
everybody.
Bye.